Okay, like I said, we do a to-do list today as an exercise for this introduction to React.js, a library that we use to build front-end user interfaces. Here's the wireframe. Again, just a simple text box. We can type something to do, click add, and then a bullet point list in the bottom here. So let's get to it. So in your code sandbox environment, if you go to codesandbox.io, the link I posted in the Zoom chat, /s/react-new, you should have this environment here after you fork in the top right. There's a directory called src and then /app.js. We're interested only in this one. So what happens here, we have the code in the middle, and then the right-hand side is the manifestation of this code. It's like a mini web browser within the whole browser here. So you can refresh and do things. So as you change the code here, for example, I send 123 to this, it will appear here. Okay, so the way everything's set up here in React is pretty simple. So we have a public /index.html page, and this page in the body, there's a div element whose ID attribute is root. So the whole React application is injected here. How does it work to inject? Well, the file src/index will have some document get element by ID root, meaning it's going to find that element. And then finally, it's going to render the React application at that element. This is not necessary. You don't have to understand this, what's going on right now. But that's how the mechanism works to inject the React application. Now going back to src/app.js, let's get going doing this to-do list. So let's start off with just have these text box, right? How can we build that? So in React, we build things with components. So a component in its most basic form is just a function, and you give it a name. For example, this is the app component. Now the component has to return something, and that's the view. That's what we're gonna see. So you return for this function something that looks like HTML, but it's actually what's called JSX. Basically, it's syntactic sugar for a function call in JavaScript, and the function is react.createElement. But writing the code with react.createElement is just too hard to see. So we prefer writing it the declarative way, syntactic sugar with JSX. It looks just like HTML, pretty much HTML written within JavaScript code. And then you can just write this right here and it will appear here in the browser, just like that. So if you do any change like I did here, let me remove the 1, 2, 3, it will appear on the right-hand side as so. Okay, let's just remove everything and just have a div there. So let's get started. What's the element we're going to use to make a text box? Well, it's going to be the input, just like HTML, right? So in HTML world, we have the input element with this input tag, right? Now in the React world, it's the same thing, except we use different terminology. When you say element in HTML world, in React world, we say component. When we say attribute, like the type attribute of the input type text, in React world, that's called a prop, which is short for property. So let's do this here. Now, React requires you, when you have a self-closing tag, to add a slash before the greater than. Otherwise, it doesn't work. You know, in HTML5, you don't need to add a slash, but in React, we have to do a slash there. Now you can see there's a text box there. Now let's add the button to add the to-do. I'm just going to break a new line, add button, type button, and I'm going to say add, and then close that. So in this case, we have a button component with the type prop set to button. Now, what's between the open and close tag. In React world, we call this the children prop. It's a special kind of prop that you can place instead of placing here, you can place it between the open and closing tags. Okay. Now let's make this style a little better. I think I want the input to take over the whole line and add some padding to the button. So let's add a container here. And this container div will contain the input and the button. And then we add a class. Now to add a class in React world, you have to be careful. You should use class name instead of class. In HTML, we have the class attribute, but in React, we have class name. Why is that? Well, because React originally, we used to write components using class keyword, object-oriented programming. So it's more encouraged to use just functions now, but the reason we don't use class here and instead use class name is because class is a keyword in the JavaScript language that's used to create a blueprint for objects. Anyway, let's call this the um, to do input container. How about that? So we got this class. Now, where do we set the styles? Well, the styles will be in the file styles.css here, but notice there's an import at the top for /, which means current directory, the file styles.css. So when this is done, it will import the styles from this CSS. So I can just go here and say the class name that I did here. So I'm just going to copy that. Make sure there's a dot before it because it's a class. So I just want to make the text input kind of expand and push the button all the way to the right. To do that, I can set this container to be display flex like this. I can press Control S in my case, Windows, to save this. And nothing's going to happen yet because I got to set the flex number for this input. So I'm going to add a class to that input. So class name, remember, you have to have name. And this is going to be, let's say, to do input, just like that. Now I'm going to go back to styles.css, dot to do input. I want this to have flex property, :1, so that it will expand and push everything next to it all the way to the end of the line. Okay. If you want to add more stuff to make this prettier, feel free to do so. Maybe add some padding, like 8 pixels, like that. Maybe you can change other stuff. That seems okay to me as it is. Now for that button add, I want to add some padding to the left and right to make it, occupy more space. So let me say add button class here. And I want to add some padding to top and then to left and right. Top bottom, I want to be maybe 8. And then space 16 pixels for left and right. Now I need to add this class, apply that to the button. So I'm going to say class name there, line 8, add button. And there's some space now to the left, to the right, and then some in the top bottom. Although I kind of stretch the input, so it might not have any effect. In any case, it looks good to me. Now let's do the following. So we want to have the to-do list right after that, right? We have to have, here's the wireframe again. So we just added the text input, the add button. Now we have some bullet points for each to do. Well, that's easy. You could just do a UL, right? Unordered list with some LIs. But well, that's going to be dynamic because we want to click add and keep adding stuff. But for now, we could just fake some stuff. So we have kind of a placeholder there. So right here, I'm going to add a UL. And I don't have anything yet, so just create some fake to-dos here. Maybe just like what we had. Do the laundry, walk the dog. Do the laundry, the first LI. And then the second LI is walk the dog. Okay. Maybe you can increase the font size. I don't know if you can see. Let me know if it's too small. Let me add a class to the UL. To-do list, and I'll add some font size there to make it bigger for you. Dot to-do list, backing styles.css, and I'll increase font size maybe. Let's see if it's 16. 24. About that. There you go. You can change it to whatever you want, okay? I just changed it so it's easier for you. All right. How's everybody doing so far? Any questions? You were able to get this far without an issue? All right. So keep going. All right. We will leave this edit and remove for later. Let's just focus on the basic functionality. That is, we want to type something to the box and click to add to the bullet point. Now that's going to take some thinking. So first, let me just start the easy way. That's just for the add button. We got to separate every kind of task we have to do here because there's too many things going on. So I want to focus just on the add button, because it might be easier to start off that way. And later we will introduce the concept of state to control the input, whatever the user types. So focus on add. So I want to add some initial value to this input just for development. We can remove it later. So I'm going to add a value prop. Remember, React World, we call it prop, not attribute. And let's just have some placeholder like we had, wash the dishes. So you can see the initial value for the input is wash the dishes, just for now, so we can have something already written there. Okay. Now let's focus on add. When I click add, I want the text that was typed in this input to be added to this list. Now let's focus. Add is, when I click, it's an event on click. So I gotta go to the button, add a prop called on click, and define its value like this. Now, HTML, you can do this, but the on click is all lowercase. But React World, it has to be camel case. Okay, so after on, make sure the C is capitalized. Now, the syntax for JSX is the equal sign followed by curly braces. It's not the quotes. Now, actually, I put quotes for the other ones because when you have string value for a prop, you can kind of drop the curly braces. So that's actually curly brace there, but I can drop it because it's optional. Okay, but always think there is a curly brace there. That's why I have to add it here. Now, this has to be a function. In the HTML vanilla, it would be just a string with the name of the function and parentheses. But in React World, you got to give just the name of the function, no parentheses. So we're going to say on add click. That's the name I'm going to give to this function. Again, you're free to use whatever name you want. I think it's descriptive to use on add click. Now we got to define this function somewhere, and we're going to do it right before the return value. I'm going to break two lines there. Make sure it's within the function, okay? Not outside. So I'm going to create a function on add click here, parentheses, like that. Now, when you click, events in HTML, JavaScript, there's always an event parameter there, but I don't think I care about it right now, so I could have just omitted, or you don't have to use it. But anyway, so when I click add, this function is going to be called. So I want to first access this value here. How can we do that? Now, that's the problem. In vanilla HTML, what we would do is, okay, I'm going to get this input in some sort of way. Like I can use query selector. I can use get element by ID, provided there's an ID attribute added to the input, and so on. But React World, we don't do that. We want to avoid doing that. Please don't do that. React World, we got to first do the following. we got to make a variable that will hold the value that the user types. And then we're going to control this input so that React will know every time you type anything, React will, oh, see, hey, you type something, therefore I will react to it and I will update the variable value. And then because the value updated, React will know, hey, something was changed in what we call state. So when the state changes, React will re-render the component. In this case, it will call the function app again. And since the value for what the new thing we typed will be there, it will call it here in the input with that value. Now, enough talk. Let's just get to it. So first, I have to go to the input here. And this value, I'm going to take it out. I'm going to create a variable for that. Now, let's call this, I don't know, to do text. How about that? Now, this variable, I got to go here outside. Now, I can't just do to do text like this because React will not know that you're going to change this. The only way React can know how to change something changed is if it tracks it by placing the variable in the state. This value has to be placed in the state so React can track its value with time. So to do that, we have to call what's called React.useStateHook, Hook. Now, in order to use that, you're going to see there's an React is not defined. So we got to go here in the top and say import React from React. So this means, okay, we're importing the React object from this library React that was installed with npm, the node package manager, for example, or you could use yarn. In any case, when I call React.useState, I'm telling React, hey, I want to keep track of a certain value. And here's the initial value that I pass as the argument. Now, this thing is going to return an array and it has two things. First is a variable that you can access the value here. In this case, you could access wash the dishes. Let me put in a new line. It would be like this. And then the second value is like a function that we can use to change this value here. Instead of wash the dishes, maybe I want to reset and clear everything and set it to an empty string after I add. Okay. Now, because of this, what people typically do is they destructure this array, meaning they extract the first element of the array into a variable, and then they extract the second element, which is a function, into another variable. Instead of them having to say to do text sub 1 to access the first element and to do text sub 1, 0 or 1 to access the second element. Okay, so people like doing this notation with the square brackets, and then you extract each like this. So this is taking, okay, we have an array on the right-hand side. I want to take the first element and set the variable to do text with that. I want to take the second element and set the variable set to do text with that. Now, because I know the second variable here is going to be a function, I usually always call it set whatever the name I use for the variable, all in camel case. This is just a naming convention that everybody uses to, just keep things consistent. Okay, and after that, you can see wash the dishes there without an issue. But if I click and try to type anything at all, nothing works. And that's because the value of to-do text is always fixed. There's no way of changing it. In order to do that, we got to add a prop to the input that's called onChange. And then you got to do the same approach. Okay, let's add a function here. Let me call on to do text change. And then I'm going to go outside here. Make sure it's either after the add click or before. It doesn't matter, but it has to be within the app function. So let me call it function on to do text change. By the way, let me enable wrapping here so you can see this better. editor, word wrap. I want to enable word wrap so we don't have to scroll horizontally. There you go. And I can see on change. Now this function we just defined here, you can do add event like that. Now we're going to use event now because when you type something there, for every character that's typed, it's going to call on to do text change. And you can access the text by saying event.target.value. Well, target is actually the input element, and the input element has a value, remember? And that's how we access what was typed there. Then we can take this and call set to do text with that value. That's the new thing that was just typed. That way, if I go there and try to type it, it's working now. If I refresh, what's going on now? Well, when I type the letter A, it's gonna go here. Okay, you typed A. I'm gonna call the onChange prop of the input, which is on to do text change. Then I'm gonna call the function set to do text, which is used to change the state of the to do text. And then we're gonna take whatever is typed under event the targeted value and replace that. And then the moment we change the value of to do text, that means it's a state change. React, when it sees a state change, will react to it. Hey, state has changed, therefore I must re-render. So it calls app again and returns a new view. Now in this new view will contain to-do text with its new value. Therefore, we see the wash the dishes with the A at the end now, there. And that's how the mechanism works. Very important principle in React that you have to understand. Every time the state changes, a re-render occurs. The component will be re-rendered. How is everybody doing so far? Any questions? All right, so let's keep going. Great, but so far we don't have anything to add. So let's go back to the add button. Remember, when I call add, when I click add, it calls on add click. Now that I finally have the value, access to the value that was typed, which is just to-do text variable, right? I can just add that to the to-do list. Now we face another challenge because, okay, the to-do list is just static stuff here. It's just allies. I have no way of injecting that new value here. How am I going to add an ally here? I cannot just hard code it, right? Because it's runtime. So that's why we've got to do some changes here. We have to generate these allies dynamically. We cannot just hard code them here. So what you can do is make an array of to-do strings. So every to-do would just be a string that's placed within an array. So let's go up here. I'm going to make a variable. I'm going to call it to-dos. Now it's an array, so square brackets, right? So I'm going to cut do the laundry here. Actually, I'm going to copy that and place it here. I'm going to go back there, take walk the dog, copy, and comma, place it as the second element to this array of to-dos. Notice I have a quote, right? Either double or single, doesn't matter. Now I have a way to store them. Let's create all these allies dynamically using the to-dos variable. So instead of writing them here, I can just map here. So I do to-dos. That's the array of elements that contain every to-do string, dot map. And then I pass a function callback. Okay, I can pass an arrow function here. So I can do parentheses, equal sign, greater than, and then some return value that's implicit. If it's implicit, I don't need to type the curly braces. So I can do li here. Now I need to access every element. So that's the first argument to the callback function. Let's call it just to do. And then I can use that here in the li. But if I just say to do here, I'm just going to literally see the word to do. So in order to interpolate or substitute the value of the variable here, I must use curly braces before and after the name. Now you can see do the laundry, the first element, and then walk the dog, the second, all transform or map into an li. Now, this is a very common operation to generate dynamic components based off an array that's passed in with all the data, right? Map is just an operation that iterates, goes through each element of the array, starting from the first one, and then it will build a new array with whatever values returned from the callback function here. So in this case, it's building a new array with LIs containing the to-do from the original. Okay, now that we have a place to store the to-dos, all we have to do is push, that is, add to the end of this array of to-dos. But again, when you have stuff like this and React must keep track of stuff, right, to react to it and re-render things, you must store this in a state. So we got to do that same pattern, use state hook. So react.use state this array, that's the initial value. And then I must destructure here because two things are returned from an array. So I want to extract them into two separate variables. One is for the access to to-dos, the second to set to-dos, that is, change the value of that state. Now, once I got that, I can use set to-dos to push something to the end of this array of to-dos. So when I click on add click, I'm going to take the to-do text and then I'm going to add to the end of an array that contains the elements for to-dos followed by the to-do text. Now, what I did here is I created a new array and I'm using this operator dot dot dot, which just means we're going to copy all the elements from the to-dos. And then at the end, I'm going to add the to-do text, which was the thing I typed there. Now we can take this and set as the new value for the to-dos. So I can say set to-dos call with this new array. Now when I click add, you're going to see it added there briefly, right? See that? If I click again, keeps adding and adding and adding and adding and adding. Obviously, this is not a very good user experience, so we're going to change that in a moment. But so far, how's everybody doing? Any questions? Would it be possible to show how this would work, utilize use context instead of use state? So use context is a whole more advanced stuff for this lecture, but we can talk about that in Discord later. If you want to hang out there after the lecture, we can talk about context thing. But for this use case right now, it's not so appropriate to use context. Use context is more for when you have deeply nested structures. You don't want to be passing the data as a prop down, 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 because it gets too messy. So you want to be able to access the data from anywhere within the nested components. So that's when you use context. Anyway, let's fix this problem of adding stuff. So usually what happens when you click add is it adds to the list, but also clears this so that the user can type something new. Anybody want to guess how to clear this? Remember, when I click add, it's setting the new to-dos here. And then I have to clear what was in the box. Remember, the variable for the box is to-do text, and there's a function to change it, set to-do text. So therefore, to clear that, what would I call here? to clear the text box. Yes. Set to do text with an empty string. Two quotes. We have that, and I click add. Let me refresh this. Click add. There you go. Fine is clear. Okay. Now, I just came across something I wasn't going to talk about, but that is what happens if I click add right now? What is going to happen? Anybody want to guess? Yeah. So this is weird, right? An empty bullet point. So maybe we want to prevent adding empty things. So the way you could do that is maybe when you click add, we're going to check, hey, did the user type anything? If the user didn't type anything, I just return from the function without doing anything. So I can go here and ask, okay, if to do text, right, that's a string, dot length is 0, I can just return. I don't have to do anything else. Returns from the function, meaning everything after return is ignored. We just stop, halt. Not going to do anything afterward. So if I do that, refresh, try to add an empty one, nothing happens because of the return. Yeah, someone said, should we add trim? Yes. So what happens if I type an empty space and click add? Oh no, I hacked it to make it work. Yeah, so if you have like blank spaces, you can use the function dot trim to remove all leading and trailing space. So this would be collapsed to an empty string. So you can always go here and say to the text dot trim, call it like that to remove all that trailing space. So that if I type a single space, that gets collapsed to just empty string. And I cannot no longer add just blank. So let me remove and type some blanks with the space bar. Click add, nothing happens. There you go. Okay, so we got add. How about we add remove? Remember, I added some remove button there before the name of the to-do. We can do that next. We have some time. So I'm going to go here. Remember the li for to-do. Inside the li, I'm going to add a button. Type button. And that's going to be remove. Notice my environment keeps reformatting the code. That's that's just this environment, but yours might not do it if you're using some other kind of environment. It just, when I save it, it reformats and styles the code a certain way. So you can see some parentheses were added. Now I got the remove button there. I want to add some style to make it not too close to the do. So let me do a class name, remove button, save that, go to styles.css, remove dash button. I want to add a margin right, maybe 8 pixels. Yeah, that's okay. 16. There you go. And maybe the button looks a bit ugly. If you want to change that, add some padding. 8 pixels, 16 pixels. It's up to you. Maybe 16 too much. It's up to you about that. And I'll add maybe background color red and color white. Oops, that's black. FF. Or you can just say white word. Something like that. You can make it prettier, okay? Border radius 4 pixels. Border 1 pixel solid black. Something like that. Anyway, change it to your own heart's content. Now let's add, when I click remove, we want something to happen. So add an on click to the button on remove click. Let's define it up here before the return function on remove click. There's an event if you want to put there. Now, if I click on remove click, will be called. Now, let's think about this. So in order to remove something, we must change the array of to-dos, right? To-dos in the state. So we must call set to-dos to change it, but we must eliminate the one that we click to remove. Now we need to know which one, right? That's the problem here, because I don't know, I have no access to know, okay, which one, because if I click remove, the target in the event is the button itself. It's not this. So I must know the position I am in some way. So what we can do, there are different ways. You could leverage an attribute. That's one way. Another way is you can leverage a function that returns a function. Let's do the function returns function. So basically what happens is we're going to go here on remove click, and we're going to call it as though it's a function, and we're going to pass the index of the element we want to remove. Now, to access the index of this array, I must add the second argument to this callback here. That's the index. So right away when it renders, we're going to be calling on remove click with the index of the element. That is, first it's going to call it with 0, then it's going to call it again with 1. Now, when that happens, we must change the signature of on remove click, because it's no longer an event that's passed in, it's an index, and it's called right away. But if you remember, on click expects the definition of a function as its value. So therefore, when I call on remove click with index argument, I must right away receive the definition of a function. So therefore, I must return a function from on remove click. And this function is the one that will handle the event. Some people like using the arrow function here. That's totally fine as well. Now, if we do this, we have access to the index of the thing we want to remove. Therefore, I can go there and take the to-dos, and I can call out filter. And this function will filter out something depending on the condition. So the argument is a callback. So we got the to-do, and then the second one is the index. Now this the to-do index. Let's call it that way because we don't want to conflict with this index here. Index to remove might be a better name. So let's call it. Now I'm going to make this explicit return instead of implicit, so I'll add the curly braces. Now, we must let pass if the to-do index is not index. And then we take this new array that's generated by this, and we use that for the set to-dos. Was that too fast? Let me change a few things here to make it a bit easier. So I'm going to create a variable here, filter to-dos, and I'm going to cut this and paste it there so it's easier for you to see. And then finally, I'm going to set the to-dos with the filter to-dos. So what's going on here? Let's go ahead again. So to-dos is a variable that holds a list or an array of to-do strings. When I call filter, it's like the map, but it's a different operation. We want to remove something. So the value that's returned here means, okay, I want to allow to pass through as long as the to-do index, the current element index, is not the one that I want to remove. Maybe I should call this index to remove so you don't confuse it. So this filter will return an array, the original, with one less element. And that's the one whose index, for example, the first one, right, is index 0. So I click remove, and index to remove here would be 0. Therefore, when I have 0 here, the first iteration will be the first 0 not equal to 0. That's false, right? Because this is false, it doesn't get passed through. It's filtered out. Therefore, the first one will be filtered out. And then the next one would be what? Would be 1. 1 is not equal to 0. True. Therefore, let it through. The second element, you're good. That's what's happening here. Okay, so we can click remove and it works. Any questions so far? Okay, now we got some time to do edit. Let's try that. Edit. Let's add a button here. Scroll down where you have the remove. Before remove, add another button. Type button, on click, on edit click, edit button. Now I got to define on edit click, function on edit click, event, like that. Now let's think about the experience here. When I click edit, I want this to be changed to an input. How would we be able to do that? Well, we must kind of keep track of what I'm editing. So we're going to have to say, what are you editing? Are you editing the first, the second, and so on? So I have the same problem as the remove. So therefore, we can try the same approach here. Or if you want, try the data attribute approach. Let me teach you. So the data attributes like this. You can add a data attribute here, dash, and I'm going to add the index value there. So what I'm doing is pretty much, if I inspect that with the DevTools pressing F12, I want to open this li in the button here. Do you see data index attribute is set to 0 for the first one? And then to the second button is 1. So that way, event the target is the button, I can extract the data index attribute and get the index there. So this is another way of solving the problem we had with remove. I just wanted to show you an alternative to that function that returns a function. Okay, knowing that, when we call on edit click, I can go to event.target.dataset.index. Now let's understand what this is doing with a console log here. I'm going to console log that, okay? And I'm open the console with F12. Let me see, or right click and inspect. And I'm going to, oh, I got to click console here, console tab. I'm going to click edit for each one. Did you see the console log there? 0, 1. So when I say event.target, I mean whoever I clicked, right? The edit button is the target. It has a .dataset attribute that's actually holding all of the data dash attributes. So if I want to access data index, I have to say dataset.index. Okay. So that's how we access that thing. Now I'm just going to leave this for reference for you. Now, we must keep track of what we're editing right now. So I must keep track like this. This is one way, okay? I make an object and I set a property being the index and I say if it's true or false like this. I know this is a bit advanced, but what it's meaning, okay, if I want to know if the first element is being edited right now, is in editing mode, I must have the value true set for the zero property. And the second one means, okay, the second to do is not in edit mode. Edit mode is false. Okay, so I must do that. Now we must keep track of this in the state, so we got to do that same thing. Use React use state like this, and then const. And we could call this editing and then set editing. Now I put initially for the first one, I need a comma here for syntax, that the first one is being edited by default. That's not really what we want. In fact, I could just have left this object empty and it would be set later as we click edit or not. So I don't have to explicitly say this here, but just for the sake of our education here, let's go it that way. Okay, so I can use editing variable in the state to know if I'm editing or not. When I'm editing, I want to show the text box with the value to do the laundry. Otherwise, I just want to show it like this. So let's go down here where we have the li, the to-do value. See that's to-do? So now it's going to be different. I got to only show that a certain condition. So if editing, and I'm going to check, okay, at the index, if that is true, I'm going to use ternary operator. If true, I must show an input type text with the value being the to-do. Now, this might change later, but for now, just do like that. Otherwise, colon, I can just put a span here or whatever with the to-do. Let's see what's going on here. Editing. If I made any mistake, React use state, comma, const editing, ternary. Oh, I forgot to put the curly brace at the end. Now you can see the initial state for do the laundry is an input there, so I can add it. And the second one is walk the dog, which is just a span. Why is that happening? Because I set the initial value for editing for 0 to be true, meaning it's editing mode on for the element at index 0. And then not editing, that is just show the text for element at index 1. Okay, now the problem is we can't edit, right? Now that's another problem. So one thing you could do is keep track of all these values for the text boxes. But again, we can follow the same approach we did for this one. That's one way. So if we do that, we would have to say, okay, we're going to have an object. The first one would be some value, okay, that we're going to be editing. And then the second one, another. But the problem here is when we click edit, we must set this value. So there's a lot going on here that we're kind of out of time, but I hope we can stay to finish it. Let's see. So let's say editing text, set editing text like that. And I must use React use state. Again, I didn't have to explicitly do this here, but for the sake of our education, I just put it there so you know what format I'm using. Anyway, what's going to happen now is when I click edit, I must set that value. But let's go down here. Instead of having value to do here, it must be editing text at the index. See, it's empty now. That's because we got to do some stuff. When we click edit, we must set that value. So when click edit, calls on edit click. So I want to set editing text, which is an object. Now it's going to be a new object with the properties from editing text copied over, but I'm going to replace the property for the index for this guy, which comes from event target dataset index. Let's put that in a variable index here. And then I got to replace it here, but I cannot just do index um, like this, to-dos at index. I must add the brackets here. So the value of index is replaced here. In this case, the first one will be 0 if I click edit for the 0. And then to-dos at index just means, okay, I'm going to go to the to-dos and I'm going to get the value for the 0, for example. So I click edit, it's going to replace that there. See that? To-do laundry. Obviously, I initially had it true, but it should be false like that. So I changed this to false here in line 9. Now if I click edit, oops, not working. Let's see what's going on here. Let's have a look what I messed up. Put in a variable, I put a comment. Okay. Oh, what's the problem now? It's actually setting it, but I didn't set editing mode true for this guy, right? Because that's set where? In this variable here, right? So I must set editing at the index to be true. So let's go there. When I click to edit, not only will we be setting the value of the text box, we will be setting editing mode. And we're going to create a new object. We're going to copy the properties over from editing. And then we're going to go at the index. We're going to say true because we're editing mode for that. Now I click edit. There you go. It's there. I click edit for the second. It's there. See, they're independent of each other. Now the next challenge they're going to see is how to actually save it, right? But how's everybody doing so far? Any questions? You're welcome. Okay, let's continue. Just finish it off. So we must save it. Let's add a save button. There are different ways to go about the user experience here. Let's keep it simple. We will add a save button here. So if you have the input editing mode on, not only do I want to show the input, but also a save button that I'll add after the input. Type button, on click. We'll call it on save click. And then we're going to say save as the label. Now, because I'm returning two things here, I must consolidate into one by either having a div or a fragment. So if I do react.fragment, I can return two things. Because in this case, I must return only one because of JavaScript. So in order to do that, I must group these two things into one thing. And one way of doing that is using what's called a React fragment. When we use a React fragment, we don't create an extra div. You could also have used a div here, no problem. That's totally okay as well. But if you use fragment, there's no div added to the DOM. If I click edit, oops, what's going on there? I didn't define on save click, that's why. Let's define that. Outside function on save click, event. There you go. Now I click edit. There's the save button. Although it's a bit cramped in there, but you can see it. If I click edit, there's a save. Okay, so let's think this through. I type something here, right? Oh, I cannot type it because it's not controlled yet. Let's fix that. Remember, this is in these inputs here. So I must add a what? Prop when I want to control it. On change. So we're going to say on, let's say editing text change. Now we got to say, okay, which one you're going to change. So we can use the data index, or you can use the function return function. Let's do function return function. So we must define on editing text change with the index, and then we return a function that has the event as the parameter. Oops, that. Now I must say, okay, how do we change the text? Well, editing text contains all the text for the inputs. So I must reference the object at the index. So I go here and I'll say, okay, set editing text, copy properties over from editing text, but at the index, I must set event.target.value. Because event.target is the input and the value is what we type new there. Now, if I go here and try to type 1, 2, 3, it's working. Now, when I click save, right, on save click, I must take this value here and replace in the original to-dos. Therefore, we must set to-dos with a new array, but that specific one has to be replaced with a new value. Now, one way of doing that is with map. So I can say, okay, I'm going to go over to-dos. I'm going to map a to-do. But then, okay, if the, let me add the index here, to-do index as a second. If the to-do index is equal to the index of the thing I just changed, I'm going to return, oops, let's backtrack a little bit. So we got the value here to the laundry 1, 2, 3. That's in editing text, right? So let's just have it here outside. Editing text at the index. Now I don't have the index here again with the save, so I must know what I'm saving. Therefore, I must do the same problem again. Go to down to where we have save, and on save click, I pass the index. Therefore, on save click now must take the index here and return a function with event like so. Then we take all of this stuff and put it inside here. Make sure it's inside this function. Okay, we got all the stuff inside. So if I take editing text with the index, that's what the new thing that I type. So this new thing will go in here. Otherwise, I return just whatever to do was before. Let me see if that was working. I must also make sure to remove editing mode when I do that, right? So I must say set editing to be dot 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 editing. Sorry, I'm going too fast because I'm trying to wrap it up. But editing at the index is false. Let's try that. There you go. So walk the dog, 1, save, there you go. So when I type something here, do the laundry today, I click save, save will call on save click. But remember, on save click was already called with the index for each one. So therefore, I actually have a function that's returned. So when I click save, it's actually calling this function inside. And then what I'm doing is, okay, I take all the to-dos, original ones. I'm going to map, meaning I'm going to transform each one. So what happens is, okay, if nothing special, I just return how it was before, right? As I'm transforming them, I transform into itself. There's no change. That's why I return to do here. But if I find that I'm iterating through and I find that specific index to do index that matches the one I'm editing or clicking to save, that means, oh, in this case, instead of returning the original, I will return whatever the user typed into this input, which is in this object editing text at the index for this guy. So this whole thing will include the array with one element, being the first element here, replaced with this value here. And then I use set to do's to replace the original. Then after that, in order to close this editing mode, bring back the other thing, I must set editing, right? Because editing is like editing mode shown or not for that specific index to be false, meaning don't show edit again anymore. So I click save, and that's why I've got today there. Now, all of this happening, React is doing everything for you because it's reacting to all the state changes, right? When I call set to do, state changes, re-render. When I call set editing, state changes, re-renders. That's why I no longer see the input because this value was changed, the state changed, and then everything is re-rendered. So by the time I reach this part where it's checking if I should show the input or just the plain text, it's hitting just the plain text because editing at that index was changed, right? To false. This value is now false for the first one. And it works independently of each other. So you can be editing multiple things at the same time and it work just for each one. Okay. So that's it, the to-do list, everybody. Sorry for going a little bit over time. I hope you appreciated this.